Hello to everybody and welcome back to the World Beyond the Ice Wall second ring series. So it's been a while, it's been 4 months since the last video. I am aware of that, don't worry about this. As I continue to do these series, I take a bit longer to make each video, either because I research more or because I have other things to do. As you can see, the other series that I'm mainly doing, which is the Nos Confundent Terra Infinita series, is also continuing. I just made the last video, I think, less than 2 weeks ago. So if you also was continuing to check that one when I was making it, go back and watch the video that I made so that you can keep on going with that series. Well, that said, I want to just get right where we were at. This is the series of the second ring beyond the Ice Walls. So for those that do not know, for those who are not aware of what this is a different projection of the map of the world in a world, basically in a theory, or well, a concept that explains that instead of just, the world finishing at Antarctica, at the ice walls, there is more to it. There are gates that are very, very guarded, so you can't really pass through them unless you make it somehow. But after these gates, there are rings of continents, of landmasses, of waters, oceans, islands, and whatever thing you can imagine that are outside of these ice walls. And the first series that I made, which was just called The World Beyond the Ice Walls, was concentrated on this concept. And it was concentrated on what we can see here as the first ring beyond the ice wall, so this right here. But now we're doing a second series on this, because not only the first ring exists, but there is a second ring which is even bigger and maybe even better than the first ring. I don't remember what episode we're on. I think this is the 6th that I'm making, maybe even the 7th. I can't recall honestly. So as we go on exploring these rings, then I can explain what each landmass and continent is trying to say. Sometimes I find a lot of information on it, sometimes I can't, but all I can do is try to explain to you all what I'm trying to find. So the first thing I'm gonna do in this episode is going a bit back. In case you don't know, we've been going basically in this direction, so starting from here, we've been going up here, and then in the east. And then we're starting to go down, back down. What we started as was around here, in Weldrom, Polybius, and some places like that. And these continents I explained a lot of, but there was one continent here which I didn't find any information on the first time I actually went through here. So I'm gonna go quickly back into it and actually explain what I found since then. This is the continent of Refijia. The title given to this continent is the calm between the storms. So Refugia, first of all, this is interesting because it's not just an island like many of these are, but it is connected to what is called the mountain ring. In fact, while the Antarctic ice walls is called the ice wall, the second ring, not the second ring, but the second divider basically between the first ring and the second ring is called the mountain ring. And as you can see, Refugia is like an outburst of territory coming from the second ring, coming from the mountain ring. So you can see these that are called the Indigo Caverns, which is a series of caves, caverns, and underway passages that get people to go from the Bifrost Ocean to the Bay of Budin, which I haven't touched yet, so still to do. But this part I was kind of like going on, and then I kind of stopped because I didn't really know what it was about, but now I kind of know something about it, so I'm gonna tell you. So first of all, geography-wise, we can see that this is a single continent coming out of the mountain ring. We can see that it has a lot of different biomes. We can see deserts here, we can see mountains, plains, even savannas, I suppose this would be, or maybe even, maybe since it's this far north, I expect it to be something more like a tundra, maybe. A taiga of sorts. And then we have tropical areas right here and right here by the archipelagos that surround this continent. And the Refugia is called the calm between the storms, both because it is literally near to, the continent of Asgard, the first empire, but also because it is near to Anubis. So it is literally these storms, as in these like whole existences like Asgard and Anubis. In case you don't know what I'm referring to, by the way, I recommend watching, I believe, one of the first episodes I made on this series. I will link it in the description because I actually explain what these places are. So let's continue. So Refugia, that is the geography of Refijia, but what exactly is this? So apparently this was an undiscovered and uninhabited continent in its origin. So when the first to land to this continent arrived, they found nothing of the sorts of like civilization, any sort of like living life that is intelligent. They found nothing like that. What they did find were traces of the ancient Hyperborean civilization that lived on the island, or rather on the islands near it. So as you can see, while the central landmass was kind of uninhabited and just unused, the islands that were here were apparently used by these Hyperboreans, or those that descended from the Hyperborean civilization. And this could be found by archaeological evidence because there weren't actually any people there. We explored Hyperborea, by the way, it's right here, the Hyperborean Vanguard, and of course Asgard. We were exploring already Hyperborean, the whole thing. There we go, there's Hyperborea. But basically, the concept is that when people came to Refugia first, Robinson Laguerre being the first one, they thought this was Hyperborea because they knew like where Hyperborea was supposed to be, which in fact it is very close to this, but they didn't know exactly where it was gonna be. According to the old myths of legend, Hyperborea was supposed to be like the perfect north, the place more north in the world, and so coming from the south, this would be the northernmost area they would have traversed. So they thought they were arriving to Hyperborea, and finding some traces of Hyperborean society was some sort of like, confirmation. But the issue was the climate, it was the kind of geography, because everybody knows that Hyperborea is like some heavenly place. Like of course it is extremely cold, as it was known, but it really did not shape up to be what they found. And what they found also was the fauna and flora. The fauna were basically just butterflies, turtles, and other small animals, while in terms of plants they found angiosperms, which is not the kind of flower that survives in very cold environments. So you can see how this was really not Hyperborea, yet they still decided to come here. So the first fleet arrived, expecting this continent to be Hyperborea itself, and kind of like skipped it after they realized that was not where it was right. Anyways, this was Refugia, since I actually knew something more to add this time. And yeah, that done, we can go back to where we were last time. So last time we talked about Yakub, we talked about Lemuria, all these places right here, the island of Patmos, the fortress of Yakub right here. We talked about Amphetaminah, we talked about New Caribia. Did we do this actually? I think so, I don't remember. Asclepia? Man, it's been a while since the last episode, so I don't even remember which one of these we did last time. I'm sure we did these and this. Don't remember what else though. Anyways, this time we're going to start with Umurangi, the lands of the Red Rain. So what is Umurangi? First of all, once again, another continent that is united with the mountain ring. Its geography is very sparse, and you can see it's kind of different from every other place, since it looks like some sort of just continent, but then there's like this inland sea, which is not a lake, by the way. There is a connection with the rest of the ocean, which is, by the way, what is it called? The Ocean of Destiny, right here. And yeah, it is interesting because, as you can see by the name, the Lands of Red Rain, this place kind of hides a dark secret, as you could say. So it is a continent that is dammed by a unique weather phenomenon, which is circumscribed to its landmass. So this weather phenomenon is barred from happening anywhere else near here because of the mountain ring. Obviously the mountains block this weather phenomenon, and then the Ocean of Destiny is so vast. Imagine just, like, think about how vast this ocean is. Look at this. This is how vast it is. Look at the Earth's oceans. Look at the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean, not even as big, okay? And the Ocean of Destiny is even bigger, since it goes all the way up here, all the way next to the Terminal Ocean. So you can understand why these weather phenomena happening in Umurangi wouldn't really spread to places like Dovland or Formosa Ultima or Lemuria. So yeah, basically what is this weather phenomenon that I'm mentioning? This is the red rain phenomena, which is recorded to have maddening effects, warping the bodies and the minds of all those who come in direct contact with it. This is why most of the fauna from Umurangi has learned to take shelter immediately at any first sight of a red cloud in the sky, right above them. So the moment the clouds get red, they know that they have to flee. And don't think there's any humans there. Of course not. This is extremely dangerous, because this red rain literally bends the mind and bodies of what it touches. Now, what this means, I have some theories on. I believe this means like some sort of acidic rain, like it literally corrodes the bodies. But then the aspect of corroding the mind is different, because does that just mean that, it just arrives to the brain and, just dissolves it? Or does it mean that it has some sort of like hallucinogen effects, where it actually makes you go crazy while it also burns your body. Well, this is not really explained, but this could be what they're talking about when they mention, just the mind being bent as well. So basically the life forms of this continent are unknown, as the risk of coming into contact with the red rain is too high for anyone to actually explore it fully, which makes Umurangi very isolated to the rest of the world, but not as isolated as a place we'll see next. Anyways, let's keep a bit digging on this concept of red rain, because it's not only talking about something that I found on this map, but actually the red rain as a concept is something that existed a long time ago, and still kind of exists when you think about it. What exactly is red rain? First of all, we have to see what the name actually means. Red rain is also a synonym of blood rain, and before you go crazy talking, okay, today's Halloween, so Halloween special episode, we're talking about blood rain? No, well, kind of, alright? So from the ancient times, it has always been a recorded phenomenon. So there are, sources upon sources of people talking about blood rain. Scientifically, some explain it as an atmospheric dust that gets in contact and mixes with the rain, and whose metals of this dust are, the red kind, the same ones that make Mars red when seen through a telescope. So that is the explanation that they give. Well, basically, the rain turns red because of these metals, and then when it goes down, it just becomes red. But then why would the rain accumulating into water puddles still be red? Because there's pictures, and I will show you one, there's pictures of like these little rivers of red rain that are fully red. So that kind of like fucks with the whole concept of it just being, just a random metal. This entire thing of the red rain has other explanations as well, and they've been varied throughout history. First of all, it was recorded for the first time in Homer's Iliad, which is really one of the main books of Western, mythology, I would say. Probably one of the main group, of written material, it is probably the most famous in history, if not one of the most famous, maybe behind the Bible, maybe the Odyssey, but those kind of things. So the Iliad, which is by the way the story, in case you didn't know, Helen of Troy and that whole war that happened with the Trojan horse. Well, basically in that book it was mentioned as a supernatural phenomenon which was caused by Zeus, which is the god of the ancient Greeks, the main one, the father god, basically the god of the sky as well, which is relevant to this, and was caused by Zeus to stop a coming battle, basically. So this was like some sort of a warning to the fighters that if they were to continue the war, they would have this red rain fall upon them. And what do we know about red rain according to the writings of Umurangi? Well, basically it's supposed to literally destroy you. So was it really a warning, or was this more like a threat, Anyways, there are more sources that actually talk about red rain and blood rain. Some of them even come from ancient Rome, like Tito Livio and Pliny the Elder. They also mention them in their writings, and these kind of sources keep on going and going and going, and they're not even only in one area. They're not only in Europe or only in North Africa, they're also in parts of Asia, parts of America. We have records of these happening again and again. In the medieval times, they thought there was literal blood, as in actual blood, which was coming from the sinners, I believe was the explanation they give themselves, which, maybe not. But anyways, in history you can see that this phenomenon is, recorded. It's not something you can just imagine one day and the next day go oh, it never happened. It is something that happened, and we still have proof of it. So the explanation in this map is that it is some sort of acidic, or at least I believe it is some sort of acidic matter that has even hallucinogen effects, which is completely damaging to any life form that exists in this continent, hence why it has not been discovered fully yet. Hence we only know the name and we only know the shape, but we don't actually know what's in it. We don't even know what type of fauna it is, unless for the fact that there is fauna, because of course otherwise there wouldn't be so much vegetation, but we don't really know where that goes from there. Anyways, also we can see that it has a lot of different biomes in it, so there has to be some sort of adaptation to it. Maybe at some point some of the animals that live here adapted to it and they don't really feel the effects, or maybe they develop some very strong shells to protect themselves from the rain, some sort of turtle shell, as we were talking about with Refijia. Anyways, that's it for Umurangi. Now I'm gonna talk about another continent, or rather a chain of continents, you could call this one, that exists in this area of the map. This is the Chinvatian Isles. So first of all, what is this? Okay, because as you can already see by what it looks on the map, it is kind of crazy. It's not the same thing as the rest of the continents. in the Beyond the Ice Walls map. We have seen some wild stuff. We have seen places like Shangri-La, we have seen places like God's Hallucinations, Zura in the first series, and even in the second series I believe we've seen some crazy stuff, like, I don't know, A was the levitating continent, so we do have a precedent for what I'm gonna talk about. A was the perfect precedent to talk about levitating landmasses. So according to this map, and according to many others actually, because it's not like a one-time thing, there is the possibility for landmasses to levitate, to float upon the land or upon the seas. This is the case explained for the Chinvatian Islands. In this case, it is even taken to a sort of extreme, because it's not only levitating across an ocean or across, another landmass, it is actually levitating on top of the mountain ring. So the elevation of the Chinvatian Islands, in terms of literally being up in the sky from the level of the sea, is insanely tall. Okay, it's insanely high. It's not water level. It's not something you can reach just by going into the sea. And my question is, can you even reach this somehow? Because how would you even be able to reach this? And how will we know anything about this? Well, we'll get to it. So these are landmasses that float in the air. They're detached from the surface of the world. The explanation on how they actually got there was a bit interesting. Its land was ripped out of the earth during the mid-late Miocene, and therefore its wildlife is extremely unique and resembles that of the eras of the antediluvian periods or times. The times where the Leviathan was still roaming the waters, the behemoth, or was it the behemoth? I think so. Yeah, the behemoth was like running upon the lands, as said in the Bible. Well, that is the interpretation. So extremely ancient times. At some point, an event made some lands rupture outside of the earth, and we will get to that. There's another explanation for it in this video. And these were the results of this land. And then you can ask, well, how were these lands kept into this like floating stage? Why didn't they not just fall into the earth itself, And well, the explanation for that is, to me, the same as the case for A was. While A was, of course, also like we saw some sort of like magical properties, it was a whole thing. I was part of the whole concept of Aleister. I believe it was like a whole thing. We talked about it in the second episode, I believe, so go check that out if you don't want to miss out. But basically, we also know there was a relation about magic, if you believe in that sort of things. Otherwise, the scientific explanation is the one you probably already guessed. It's magnetism. It's always magnetism. The Chinvatian Islands managed to survive outside of the Earth as a separate thing from the Earth itself because of magnetism. In this case, because of the high magnetic pressure that is derived from the mountain ring. Also, one of the most interesting aspects of this archipelago is that it resembles some sort of floating wall. When you think about it, it does not really look like a single continent like we've seen with Awas. Instead, it literally looks like a small wall that divides what exactly? Well, nothing really, but it is interesting that it's the formation. Also, you can see that all of these are very, very small islands, and the only one that really has something going on is this one. This one appears to have even a lake inside of it and a mountain chain inside of it. Just imagine what it will look like. Just reaching there on top of the mountain ring, you look into the sky, and what do you see? These floating islands, and a full archipelago of islands. The size of this is insane. Like just compare this. Like just think like this, and compare it to, I don't know, maybe even Greenland. I suppose this is the size of Greenland even. The smaller ones probably are not that big, but this one is insanely big, because as you can already guess, everything in the second ring is bigger than what it seems, because compared to the lands behind the ice walls, it looks way, way, way smaller, but then you get into it and then it's way larger. Anyways, with that said, I want to get into an interesting fact about the Chinvatian Islands, which is part of its wildlife. So you might have noticed this like context here, the subtitle, I guess, Cities of the Giants. So why is this called the Cities of the Giants? Well, I don't know the fact about the cities, okay? I don't know about that, but I do know something about this. It is that this is the native land of the rock. So what is a rock? Some people do know, some people do not know. I'll explain it. It is what the people of the Middle East and nearby areas called a bird that was so big it could grab elephants with its talons and feed on them. And it originates from these islands. And in these islands it is called, by its scientific name, Argentavis magnificens. So this Argentavis magnificens is this insanely huge bird whose wingspan is almost the size of a whole plane, and they migrate. Like most birds, they migrate and they reach Earth, and they manage to, give these like legends to them, the people, to the native people of the land, where there were these like huge birds which ate people, and the kind of birds we're talking about actually still have some traces on Earth themselves. I don't know if this is a false image. I will show it. I don't know if this is a false image. I have not looked into it too much. I've seen this since I was a little kid, so I assume at this point it is real, because if this is real, it's insane. This should be a small specimen of the Argentavis magnificens of the rock. So this means it's not the like size it gets to, but it is the size that it could get for a small specimen. And it is insane. Like, just look at the wingspan compared to this man. And I don't think this is a small man either. This is not some sort of small person, Is it just an average guy? And it is compared to this bird, which is insanely huge. Its wingspan, it's almost a plane. And imagine that in its most like large form. You can understand what kind of creature this would be for the humans of the time. Just seeing this creature, just falling from the sky, getting an elephant, getting some sort of livestock with its talons and bringing it up, and then they eat him. And you never know what happens. And sometimes probably humans were, prey of these too. Actually, that reminds me, there is this theory that explains that one of our natural predators in the like pre-modern human times, pre-civilization times, was actually some sort of eagle coming from like South Africa. This eagle, this huge eagle, would prey on actual humans and would literally kill our young if they were not protected in caves or other sorts of like ancient prehistoric huts. So just mentioning that because I remembered it in the context of the rock. So this is for the Chinvatian Islands. The giants, by the way, in case this was not obvious by what I mentioned, but the giants referred to these Chinvatian Islands are of course the rocks, so the birds. And we're not talking about giants in the sense of literal giants. We've seen things like this also in the case of the Titanic forests. Like, is it giants? Is it like the sequoia, the forest of giants? No, we're not talking about giants like human-like giants. We're talking about all sorts of giants. So giant trees, giant birds, giant animals, that sort of thing. Anyways, let's get to the next continent. Formosa Ultima, the land of the broken moon. So this is one of the bigger ones we've seen so far. Of course, not the size of Greater Lemuria, but it is very big in terms of an island of the ones we've seen so far. There will be bigger ones next, but, as of now, it is pretty huge. And the explanation for this has been interesting. Let me tell you that. This has been definitely an interesting read. So, it is one of the most isolated continents in the second ring. It's been disconnected from everything else since the Carboniferous. We're talking about literally millions of years ago. Tens of millions of years ago, Formosa Ultima was disconnected from everything else on the Earth. It's not like the Chinvatian Islands. It's not like Umurangi. It is disconnected from everything. Now, we can either start talking about the continent itself, or we can start talking about this subtitle, the Land of the Broken Moon. What is this referring to? And when I looked into it, of course, I came back to this. I actually mentioned this, I might have mentioned a little bit of this in an episode of Terra Infinita by Nos Confundem, which is the other series. But this goes back to the theory of Theia. So, what is that? Well, basically, many researchers have hypothesized that in the beginning of the formation of Earth, the moon, as we know it, didn't exist. Instead, it came much later. How did the moon form? Well, basically, a celestial body the size of Mars, originally either an asteroid or source of another plane of existence altogether, pulled by the force of gravity coming from Earth, crashed into our primordial homeland, so Earth itself, causing the remnants of said explosion to bolt off the Earth and become the moon, creating our own first satellite. So this is how the moon got created, and this is not a few people believing this. This is like almost an accepted theory at this point. While at least it is very widespread. I think I was actually taught this in school. I might be wrong, but I remember seeing a video about this in school. Like, they taught us this. So I don't know what the consensus on this is, but I'm pretty sure many people believe this. And the concept of Theia is that basically Theia was this other mass that fused into ours. But instead of the theory of it just fusing all together in an era where volcanic explosions and magma and like land crust was still creating, therefore everything just came together and there is no actual trace of Theia that can be defined separately from the rest of the primordial Earth. In the case of this map, Formosa Ultima is shown as this trace. It is the place where the last intact fragments of Theia are on Earth's crust, and they would eventually become Formosa Ultima. Which means that the reason why it's so divided from the rest of the world is because its existence itself it's kind of like a wild card. It's something separate from everything else. It is a coincidence, it is almost a miracle, and therefore nothing in the rest of Earth ceases as its own. I can't imagine what this actually looks like. We have a short description that I found when researching Formosa Ultima. Apparently the flora and fauna resemble those of the period before humans roamed the Earth. We're talking about the Carboniferous, an era that is completely unrecognizable to our own. The plants were mainly coniferous forests. They were huge, mangrove-looking forests covering the entire plane of existence of Earth. Literally, everything inside of the ice walls was covered in these places, and, well, obviously humans didn't exist, but not even mammals existed apparently, only was just reptiles and bugs. That was, and of course fish, but that is in the seas. But in the land, it was only bugs and reptiles. And these primordial reptiles, which by the way, I'm not even sure they were reptiles. I think they were still amphibians, not even evolved into reptiles yet, or they were in the process of evolving into reptiles. But imagine like a landmass covered only in that in the modern world. Like imagine just going from, New York City to Formosa Ultima and everything you see is just covered in these like huge bugs, huge meganeuras, which were the biggest extent of what the dragonfly got into, or the actual terrifying basically millipedes, centipedes that existed in those times. But basically, the only difference from that to Formosa Ultima is the presence of a huge, almost hill-sized mollusk, which through the available oxygen that is taken from the coniferous and abundant forests that have kept growing only in Formosa Ultima, outpacing any other life forms, these mollusks became the main life form from Formosa Ultima, becoming basically the like most successful kind of life that existed there. And these are mollusks, so imagine it just becomes like a huge slug, a huge slug with its old shell. I'm not sure if those slugs had shells, but I'm gonna imagine it as such. It's just what I do. Anyways, yeah, basically this is the biggest resource and also the biggest devourer of this continent, because the amount of biomass necessary for the survival of the species in this continent is almost a danger to themselves and the continent, because if creatures so big exist, then they need the substance, they need the food to survive of it, and the entire continent can provide it to an extent, but after such a point it just becomes unsustainable. And before I finish off with the video, I want to mention one thing. This description of Formosa Ultima actually got me thinking about something I found online a while ago. I will link it in the description. I don't remember who made this, but this is a thought experiment. This is the Long Island organism speculation, basically. It's a speculative concept that brought the idea of a world where inside of the ice walls, in this case specifically under Long Island, which, in case you don't know, right here, it is New York City, basically. Inside of the Earth, beneath it, there seems to be an organism the size of Long Island. Now, actually imagine that for a second. We're talking about a creature, of course also some sort of slug or some sort of theropod, so an insect of sorts, that is the size of Long Island. In the story, which I will link once again, basically what happened is that in the 1800s or early 1900s, somebody was excavating for the purpose of creating the metro of New York City, and they found a skeleton, kind of like the skeletal parts, the exoskeleton of this creature. They didn't recognize it as such. They thought it was some sort of like artificial man-made item until they kept digging, and they finally realized what they were looking at, and were absolutely terrified because the realization that an existence was available for creatures like that was just insane. And not only that, apparently it was not dead. This was not a cadaver. This was a living being. It was in hibernation. And according to the story, these creatures hibernated for so long because their only like source of like life was literally hibernating, so they didn't create the need to use more biomass, which they needed to reproduce. So basically, this being, once awakened, would travel the world to find another mate, which was the same size of it, and then go back into hibernation. But during that traverse, that like trip, it would consume a level of biomass. So we're talking animals, trees, plants, water, everything, biomass, everything that is living. They will consume such a level of it that would create a mass extinction. And the biggest risk is that apparently all of these creatures are linked one with each other, which means that they all share a common mind, which in turn means that once one is waking up, everyone is waking up. And that will create a catastrophe that will end the world. But that's not related to our map. It was just a fun and interesting series. I mean, okay, I don't know how fun that is, but it is very interesting as a thought process, like a thought experiment. And I remembered it because, you know, the concept of like a slug, sort of like a mollusk, being the size of a hill in Formosa Ultima, is just so wild that you can just go back to it, you know. It just shocked me. I remember reading the Long Island organism map and the post, and I was like, oh my god, imagine if that was real. We'll be cooked, let me say, for sure. Anyways, that is it for this episode of the second ring beyond the Ice Walls. We have learned how Refugia actually is, we've talked about Umurangi, we've talked about the Chinvatian Islands, and finally we talked about Formosa Ultima. I don't know what's next, maybe Eden, finally? Maybe. Or maybe something else. Anyway, keep supporting the series, like, subscribe, and comment to support the algorithm. And if you want me to keep going with the series, let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching. See you next time.